Australia's biggest problem is that the brutality, violence and contempt lavished upon the convicts and later upon the working class has made us very anti-intellectual. This puts us in a terrible place at this time in history when the technological arms race is accelerating so dramatically. We must embrace education or fail catastrophically. Many countries are making an absolutely enormous investment in artificial intelligence, robotics, and quantum computing. We are living through the fourth industrial revolution. Naturally, Australia will be left behind. Australia's biggest problem stems from its convict heritage. A great many convicts died before they even arrived in Australia. A great many more died from the horrifying mistreatment, malnutrition, and diseases when they lived here. And almost every single convict who was separated from their family and sent to Australia never saw their family again. One of Australia's most famous convicts, John Frost, went on a series of lectures across America after obtaining his freedom. Frost's lectures were dominated by a tale of brutal tyranny, arbitrary rule, physical torture, human degradation and destruction. Since 1788, he argued, the British government had destroyed thousands, and probably scores of thousands, of the bodies and souls of the men and women placed in their charge. Conditions were absolutely horrific here. Frost claimed that some of the penal system's officers were chosen for their lack of humanity, and their rule had resulted in a tyrannical code not equalled in severity anywhere in the civilized world. The free settlers despised and feared the convicts and treated them absolutely terribly. Rarely did they show any humanity or compassion. Convicts were regularly flogged for breaches of regulations so minute they were impossible for any man to remember, never mind obey. In one case, an old man, almost blind and deaf, was brutally flogged for his failure to recognize and therefore give due respect to the commandant of Port Arthur Penal Station. Only a tyrant, Frost concluded, could punish a man for being unable to obey that order. To make matters worse, the punishments were imbued with an attitude of merciless severity. The system was characterized by sadism and torture. Cruelty reigned for cruelty's sake, according to Frost. He claimed the men who inflicted the punishments felt a gratification in inflicting and witnessing human misery. When the men were lashed, their flesh was cut as if a saw had been used. When they were cut down from the triangle, the victim's chest was quite black and in such a state that no one had ever seen anything like it who had not lived in the penal colonies. 25 lashes, Frost declared, would have produced more suffering than 300 as they are given in the army. Frost said, "Never, in any age or country, has society existed in such a depraved state as I have witnessed in the penal colonies. The mode in which convicts are treated drives them to desperation, and the very worst passions become excited. Injustice and cruelty destroy the reflecting faculties and leave no thought or wish but immediate gratification for the sensual. In such cases, no moral feelings can restrain men from commission of the very worst acts." What he is saying is the men and women of the penal colonies were treated so barbarously that many of them then went on to commit barbarous or depraved sexual acts themselves. The violence and utter horror had destroyed their minds and turned them into brutes. Men and boys were routinely brutalized, flogged and raped. The state of things in Van Diemen's Land shows too clearly what men possessed of power are capable of when subject to no restraint and far removed from public observation and censure. The cause of the evil of convict sodomy was irresponsible power in the hands of vicious men. Frost declared that Australia had been a beautiful and fertile country, admirably calculated to produce everything necessary for the comfort of men and women. Yet despite this, the government had still managed to turn it into an uncivilized, morally diseased and depraved society. Frost said that the appalling situation he had witnessed in the penal colonies would never have been permitted if the people had been allowed to be fairly represented in Parliament. So Australia's convict past was one of sick and depraved levels of sadism, rape, sodomy, floggings, cruelty, injustice, and brutality inflicted upon men and women who had no legal representation, no power, and no representation in Parliament. It is this horrifying cruelty, horrifying brutality, and horrifying mistreatment of convicts that caused the schism in Australia between the educated elites and the uneducated convicts. The children of the convicts gradually morphed into the working class, but the very deep wounds left over from the convict days and from the horrifying mistreatment of convicts has cast a long shadow and made the working class want to be nothing like those who oppressed, mistreated, and brutalized them. Thus, if the free settlers were intellectual, the working class were anti-intellectual. This schism, which has made Australia itself largely anti-intellectual, and the long shadow of the convict days, puts us in a terrible place in the modern world where we are entering the fourth industrial revolution, the age of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, drones, and levels of technology that our ancestors could only have dreamed about. Our Southeast Asian neighbours are dedicated to science and education. Australia is not. Our education levels have been dropping and dropping and dropping for decades. We risk becoming the black hole of Southeast Asia. If we do not embrace science, technology, and education, Australia will become a deep pit. Our Southeast Asian neighbours will prosper and grow ever brighter and brighter and brighter, and we will fail. We will fail and become the black hole of Southeast Asia. I'm here to reverse that. And that is why science, technology, history, and education is the be-all and end-all of turning this country around. We will save hundreds of billions of dollars on depression, anti-anxiety medication, drug addiction, violence, rape, murder, if we embrace education. We must shape education to the self-image of the working class. Only when Australia embraces education and narrows the horrifying gap between our education levels and our Southeast Asian neighbours' education levels. Only when we do as they do, value education as they value education, aim impossibly high as they aim impossibly high, plan long-term as they plan long-term, only then can our country be prosperous. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Cheerio.